The most interesting encounter of round 3 of Norway Chess was Magnus Carlsen against Hikaru Nakamura. These two players have a long-standing rivalry. They often produce really fascinating games. And, well, Carlsen has a huge plus score against Nakamura, but recently, well, Hikaru's been fighting back. In Bilbao last summer, Hikaru actually beat Magnus. So let's see what happens today. Carlsen with the white pieces. Sicilian, so that's good news. You know, Hikaru not afraid of a fight. So we've got a dynamic opening, and Magnus goes for an open Sicilian, and it's a Najdorf variation. And, well, Magnus plays it pretty calmly. He goes for h3. So this is this fashionable line at the moment. Usually white tries to expand with g4, and black has many moves here. e5 is the classic Najdorf move. You can also play with e6, and you can play with g6 as well. It's also a very reasonable move. And now instead of playing g4, Magnus just puts the brakes on and plays g3. That's funny. But in this g3 system against the dragon, h3 is actually a very standard move. So in fact, yeah, it's not clear that g4 is actually achieves that much anyway. So anyway, g3, it's a pretty standard position that they've reached. And, well, here, yeah, castles is normal, castles are normal, and now Hikaru plays knight d7, which is a little bit unusual. I mean, the standard move here would be bishop d7, and then perhaps rook c8, maybe rook b8 and b5. You know, this is the usual way to proceed, and this is not at all bad for black. It has decent reputation. But knight d7 is a little bit unusual. I mean, Hikaru kind of thought this was normal afterwards, but it does allow white to move forward in the centre. So, well, one trick is, if white isn't very careful, for example, plays queen d2, then knight d5 can come, and this is where this knight spin suddenly looks very effective, because there are chances not only to play knight c4, but also to take here and then play bishop takes h3, landing a lovely knight fork. Yeah, so that's the tricky side of it. But of course, Magnus is very aware of that and plays b3 just to cover that c4 square. And, you know, knight e5 would be completely ineffective now. But, well, Hikaru was expecting this. He played these moves fairly quickly and traded, and played b6. So this is his big idea. He just wanted to trade these pieces and put the bishop on b7 and play possibly rook c8 with a comfortable position. So, well, as Magnus said afterwards, white has to react quickly here, or he could actually be a little bit worse. You know, if the position is very calm, you know, there are weaknesses on the c-file. So that's why knight d5 was played by Magnus, and looks very natural indeed to put the knight on the outpost. Bishop b7, and now c4. So Magnus has staked his claim in the middle of the board, but, well, black can fight back in several ways. I mean, normally when white establishes this kind of Morozzi bind, then b5 is the move. And what Magnus did was, what Hikaru did was first play e5, just to gain a bit of space in the middle, and then play b5. Well, Nakamura said afterwards that he was very tempted by the exchange on d5. Now, obviously, if pawn takes, then that gives black a very nice initiative on the king side with this nice pawn majority. So pawn takes, and then a5. Now the idea is to prevent b4, so that after rook c1 the knight comes to c5, so it can't be pushed away at the moment. And then with this knight secure, then you can start thinking about advancing on the other side of the board. But this is actually a very double-edged position, because white will go for b4, pushing that knight out of the way. Well, black can force this. And then play rook c6, and then the knight spins into d4. But white will simply give up an exchange here. And this is quite a double-edged position. I mean, after the game, Nakamura seemed to think that black should be okay here. But, well, this is the kind of attractive positional sacrifice that Carlsen loves to play. So I think it's understandable that Hikaru selected another move. And b5 looks extremely logical to chip away at this pawn. So rook c1. And then black took. And now Hikaru took on d5 straight away, and then played a5. So again, preventing b4 for the moment and possibly looking to play the knight into c5. So this is a very logical sequence from both players. So rook's doubled, and perhaps the rook can come into c6. And knight c5. So if white is going to get anywhere, you need to either eliminate this knight or push it out of the way. So a3. And here, well, Hikaru played f5. You know, he's a very confident player, and he just launched this forward. But, well, Carlsen said after the game he thought this looked insanely risky, because it does open up black's king along the 7th rank. For example, a quieter way to play would be a4, and if b4, then the knight comes into b3 and can look to come into d4 again, or if takes, then simply queen d7 and the knight is secure. I mean, I guess that Magnus would do something like this and just sort of live with that knight on d4. But should be okay for black, I think. But instead f5, and things become really double-edged now. So b4, pushing the knight out of the way, which went back. And you can see if white manages to break through, then the king will be exposed because that pawn's disappeared from f7. And here Magnus played rook c6, which looks very natural. But the world champion said after the game, this wasn't a good practical choice, and he was kicking himself. He said, I have no idea why I didn't go for b5. I have no clue what he's going to do. Well, yeah, this is a more practical move, because with the rook on c4, then this holds up the advance of the f-pawn. So play turns to the queen side, and really I think the move that black has to play here is to bring the knight back to c5. But then white can sacrifice the exchange. Now, objectively, this is probably okay for black. But, you know, it's a little bit tricky. White certainly has very good compensation. He has a very secure king. These two pawns are potentially menacing. You could also play rook takes c5 here. Also playable. I mean, white certainly has decent compensation, but, well, I think black should be okay there as well. But, yeah, Magnus not happy with his choice of rook c6, because suddenly black gets counterplay on the king side. I mean, this is an extremely double-edged position. White is a pawn up, but suddenly there's a threat of f3 for black. And here, well, Magnus didn't really appreciate the danger. He should have traded off a couple of rooks and played this position. And then, you know, something like this. And compared to the game, this is far less risky. I mean, both players thought that black should have sufficient counterplay here. But, well, certainly white is not in the kind of danger that we saw in the game. Magnus played king h1 immediately, and after f3 then knight f6, and yeah, Hikaru said after the game that after he played knight f6, he started to get very optimistic. Probably Magnus should put the brakes on and bring the queen back here, but he played queen e6, and then after king g7 he realised that, well, things are not so clear. Now you can see that, you know, this rook can perhaps come down here to get counterplay. So Magnus started trading, and the king finds a pretty secure square on h6 compared to what it was like on the back rank. Not so good, but it's pretty secure on h6. And now, well, white has to watch out for moves like this. You know, this is already very nasty, so therefore queen e1 and rook a2. Things building up nicely. Now there's a potential threat of rook e2. Of course, that's immune because of queen g2 mate. So therefore rook e7 from Carlsen. And here Hikaru forced a draw. After the game, I mean, both players were quizzed about what about knight d5. Hikaru thought that, yeah, it wasn't enough, and indeed rook e5 looks like a very good move, and if queen d2, then there is this excellent move, bishop c4, and, well, certainly the problem is for black that both these pieces are attacked. I mean, maybe in this position, in fact, the best move is to play rook e2, trading off pieces, and, well, this is going to be a draw pretty shortly. White's king is a little bit insecure. I think it's going to be too tough to hold on to this pawn. So it should be a draw after knight takes pawn, basically. But Hikaru forced the draw straight away with knight g4. Obviously, threats knight takes f2. So this was taken. So black has a piece down. But the king is exposed. So black is able to make a draw by perpetual check. And after repeating the position a few times, they shook hands. Well, an entertaining game. Lots of content there. And, well, in the end, Magnus seemed fairly relieved, actually, to escape from his difficulties. But he was also kind of kicking himself that he didn't put more pressure on his opponent earlier on. I think Hikaru was pretty satisfied with drawing with the black pieces against the world champion. All 5 games were drawn in round 3, which leaves Kramnik and Nakamura still in the lead on 2 out of 3. Friday's a rest day in Norway Chess. They play the 4th round on Saturday.